Welcome to Theology in the Margins, conversations at the edge of society, a space for the curious and the hopeful.
We are your hosts, Natalie and Dane, and we invite you to join the conversation as we explore the questions that define our times. Welcome to the first full episode of Theology in the Margins. In this episode, we spoke with Dr Alistair McKitterick from the London School of Theology about the Bible Society's research into a quiet revival of faith, especially among Gen Z and young men, touching on identity, masculinity, cultural pressures, and of course, intelligent design.
If you enjoy the conversation, then make sure to give us a follow on Instagram and Facebook. That's right, Facebook, still a thing. We are at Theology in the Margins. And subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify so that you don't miss our fantastic future episodes. If you've got any thoughts or feedback, we would love to hear from you. So just drop us a message on Instagram.
But for now, enjoy this episode of Theology in the Margins.
Welcome to this episode of Theology in the Margins. Today we are delighted to be joined by Dr Alistair McKitterick, Senior Lecturer in Practical Theology at the London School of Theology. Alistair is a gifted theologian and teacher whose research explores the relationship between theology, education and scientific rationality, with a particular interest in how we can teach and talk about intelligent design in a post-secular world. We will be discussing the recent rise in young adults returning to Christianity, the theological, sociological and psychological factors informing this trend, and ask whether we can make sense of and speak into the spiritual and cultural shifts of our time. Alistair, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, we're going to start with this really interesting piece of research from the Bible study. And I know, Natalie, you've spent a couple of weeks engaging with that research. So I'll sort of hand over to you at this point.
Yes. Hello, Alistair. Thank you so much for being with us. This report was so interesting to read. I'm sure you found it fascinating as well. For those who don't know, it came out in April 2025 this year. And I think one of the two big takeaways from it really is that overall church attendance in England and Wales has risen by 56% between 2018 and 2024. And then on top of that, we've got this amazing interest from young people as well. So monthly church attendance among 18 to 24-year-olds has increased what was 4% 2018 to 16% in 2024. So Alistair, I'm quite interested to know if you were surprised by this trend, because as someone who is living, breathing, working within faith, but also teaching young people as well, maybe that's something that you saw happening. I'm quite interested to see, yes, if that's a trend that you saw happening anyway, or this was a complete surprise to you.
Yeah, this is a really interesting report. The Bible Society, it's called the Quiet Revival. And it was quiet because it caught me unawares. I don't mind admitting that. And very excited. And then there's, I suppose, the possibility of sort of self-fulfillment. Now that you've been told about it, do I go around looking for it? But it is interesting, some of the sort of the figures that you see. I think that my engagement with young people is at the age where they are thinking about doing university studies and, or in my case, master's studies. And I suspect there's probably a bit of a lag. So that the report was over the last 6 years. Or 2019 was the last study, 2025, or is it 2018, 24? And so over that period of time, they're saying that there's been this remarkable rise. If that's true, and there are lots and lots of indications, and the reliability of the report was very high.
Yeah.
If that's true, then we should start to see the fruit of it, we hope, in people then turning that into studying God's word in a more intentional way. So maybe this is the point where I would start to notice. But a really interesting example was just very recently, one of my colleagues here at church invited school, sixth form, upper fifth, to come for a class on intelligent design, a day conference that I did. 3 schools, the teachers responded very positively, and sent in total about 60 kids to come and listen to intelligent design for a whole day. Now, I just suspect that 10 years ago, that would never have happened.
Interesting.
That I thought was a really interesting bellwether
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
indication that something in the water has changed.
Indeed, indeed. And that sort of leads us on to the second sort of line of discussion, really, which is, I mean, I have got quite completely unevidenced through empirical research, I hasten to add. I'm sort of like the Sigmund Freud of sociology. I just sort of dream stuff and then go, that's probably true. But I've got a bit of a hot take sociologically on this movement. And I wonder your thoughts on this. So in terms of the sort of more cultural aspect of what might be driving this re-engagement with faith, and in particular Christian faith. You know, I'm of the opinion that this is driven by really the failure of the sort of neoliberal project, right? So since the sort of late 1980s, we've been told through our major institutions, as much as the media and everything else, that effectively, you know, we're in this sort of hyper-individualist neoliberal society. You can find meaning through consumption, etc., etc. And ultimately, as inequality grows, the neoliberal project is failing by way that people are realizing that they're not finding fulfillment through consumption, through, you know, the sort of the quest for hyper-individualist wealth and all this kind of stuff. So I'm of the opinion that young people are turning towards faith-based systems, in particular Christianity, because of that sort of lack of meaning, and because what they were promised, or what they have been promised, and indeed what their parents were promised, has not really come to fruition. As a sociologist, that's sort of where I see this turn happening. You know, what about you in terms of the cultural and material factors that might be informing this? I know there's a spiritual argument, which I'm sure you're going to make and make well, but you know, what do you feel like might be driving this outside of perhaps a spiritual approach?
That's great. Yeah, really interesting, and the right kind of language and concepts to use. So, is this a disappointment in materialism? Is this a disappointment in sort of being able to design myself, in being able to sort of project my values and be me? And there's a slight pushback, and that is that there doesn't seem to be any sort of rapid decline in, you know, young people choosing brands or identifying with products or taking the next best thing. So unless there was a sort of strong correlation with that sort of decline, I'm not quite convinced that that's the main reason.
Right.
But I think the philosophy behind the neoliberalism position, namely that it's all down to you, and you not only get to be who you are, but you have to be who you are because there's nothing else for you to be.
Sure.
I think that philosophy is leaving people dissatisfied.
Yeah.
And I think the reason that that philosophy was undermined in the first place is because the confidence that people had in it came from a sort of philosophical and indeed scientific naturalism.
Yeah.
That matter is all there is, nature is the ultimate reality, and that since there's nothing higher than yourself, you are essentially condemned to be yourself. There's nothing more for you to strive for. And I think that coming from a sort of someone who's very interested in the intelligent design debate and some of the cultural trends that have gone along with that, Justin Brierley puts it very well. He says the new atheism became old. And I think that's probably key, or at least that's where I'm seeing the sort of resonances in the conversations that I have. People have lost faith in the promise that at the end of the day, there's no meaning and that it's all just material, and at the end, nobody cares.
There's a brilliant quote by the Scottish philosopher Alistair McKitterick, where he says, facts like the telescope and wigs for gentlemen are a 17th century invention, which I really like. And I guess that takes us into this sort of postmodern space then, where, you know, is this a sort of, you know, where neoliberal postmodern spaces have sort of broken down, you know, this sort of objective knowledge into absolute, almost moral relativism, I guess, right? In that what is right or wrong for you is a completely subjective thing. So is your argument maybe that this is a turn back towards something more objective outside of the self, that this is perhaps something, I mean, we know that C.S. Lewis talks a lot about sort of moral laws, you know, and that the existence of moral laws is evidence of the existence of God, right? So is this, you know, am I understanding your argument right, that you feel this is a turn back towards the search for something more objective outside of the subjective self, which sort of guides our morals and guides our situatedness in the context of our society?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure that it's driven morally yet. In fact, I think most folk have avoided making that moral argument. You don't see the sort of the success of the sort of moral preachers saying that you're sinners, saying that you're
Yeah,
condemned.
yeah.
That sort of language hasn't had any resonance, I still don't think, with this culture. But I do think the lack of mystery
Yeah,
um, and the um, and the insufficiency of just seeing ourselves as material beings. I think that has caused people to wonder what more, and that what more is God. And I think the fun side of things, from my point of view, is and there's all sorts of scientific reasons to believe in God more than ever before.
sure.
And so the sort of the confident atheist who rested solidly, sat securely on a sort of view of science that said you can have faith if you want, but you're going against the evidence and you're going against reason, and it's a crutch for somebody who's weak.
Yeah, yeah.
That has all finished.
Right.
Because now the science is pushing against
Yeah,
atheism.
yeah.
It's tending towards a sound belief in God.
Yeah.
And it's making people saying, well, if that's true, how then should I live my life?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's really interesting, and it's Natalie, I know that you were sort of reading in the report about sort of the relationship to mental health as well, perhaps.
Yeah, well, see, because I'm quite interested from a psychological point of view, how this could be a result of a lack of identity or an identity crisis as well. That need for purpose and belonging as well. I think for a long time we've been so hyper individualized. We've lost community, and actually, like you were saying, it's not working. And people are realizing that, especially young people. It was interesting in the
But I mean, sorry to interrupt you. I mean, Alistair raised a really interesting point, which is that if it wasn't working, then we wouldn't see the sort of continual consumption of the branded identity, which there's no evidence that that's sort of backtracked in any way. But I wonder if that can happen alongside, you know, you can continue to almost self-deprivate by way that you can continue to try to consume your way to happiness whilst at the same time becoming increasingly alienated from it.
Sort of related, but I did find it interesting that the report found that in young people, they were more influenced by friends and relatives by coming to church than they were by celebrities.
Yeah, interesting.
And I was quite shocked at that, to be honest. I thought, oh, you know, is it because we have seen, you know, the likes of Jordan Peterson, and there has been this kind of uprising almost within like Hollywood and fame and popularity, popular culture, that we're starting to see and hear about Christianity. And so I presumed that young people might have been coming in that way, rightly or wrongly,
accessing through these sort of organic intellectuals, right?
The report was saying that no, it's not really. It's still, it's those who are close to you. But yes, back looking at mental health, we know that there is, I think, worryingly quite high statistics of anxiety and depression, probably amongst all of society, but especially amongst 18 to 24-year-olds. And they found that 58% of them frequently felt anxious and depressed. 61% was women and 48% was men. So for me, I kind of feel is the church and faith and hopefully finding Jesus and God, is that helping people with their mental health, especially young people, because they're not getting it from anywhere else. And I'm just harking back to an example within our own church. Several weeks ago, some young males came for the first time ever. They were obviously new to church, and the leaders of the church went up to them afterwards and said, well, of course, you know, welcome, happy to have you here. May I ask what brought you to us today? And they said, have you seen the world? It is chaos out there. and we are looking for peace.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, wow, well, that sums it up, really, doesn't it? You know, I just, for me personally, I think, and I can draw on my own experience with that as well, that faith does help with your mental health. So that's, yeah, I don't know. What do you think, especially with the males and I know there's a lot going on with male and mental health, young men as well, suicide rates.
Yeah, I mean, there's we've got. I mean, the report highlighted in there a five-fold increase in Gen Z male interest in Christianity, and there is perhaps a conversation around. I think, I mean, I'm a big believer that we need to very quickly push past the idea of toxic masculinity. I'm a big believer in that. I think that the issues around particularly young men um, in educational spaces, I think we need to push past that idea very quickly by a way that I think is far more complicated and multifaceted than simply saying young men are going online and listening to Jordan Peterson or Andrew Tate and
Yeah.
or they're sort of, just simulating what they're seeing in
Yeah.
these. I think that there are a lot more material and cultural factors informing that. But I do also believe that there has been a destabilization, in many ways a positive one, around hegemonic masculinity, right? And from an intersectional lens, when we look at, well, what does sort of British masculinity look like for a Gen Z male, I think there has been a destabilization by way that, we've seen a decline in male dominated industries and all this kind of stuff. And so at the same time, there's a bit of a cultural attack on young men, I think, at the moment, as my personal view, is that, young men are under attack a little bit by way that they are constantly being told that there is this toxic masculinity and, you're the problem and things. And I'm being very, very broad strokes, you understand. But I do wonder, again, going back, whether it's a turn back towards a sort of set of guidelines, really, which maybe they need, or I mean, certainly for me, again, Alistair's quite rightly highlighted this perhaps isn't so much of a moral sort of set of guidelines or a moral framework, but it's perhaps just a framework that says, well, this is how you can find some sense of community and meaning, and this is how you, behave, even on a surface level. This is how to engage with your society. And actually, there's quite a rigid framework within the Christian belief about how you can just engage in your society, and it's a framework based on love, and it's a framework based on empathy, which I think, yeah, certainly how masculinity is being framed and almost attacked in many ways as being toxic and something that we need to overcome. I'm not sure how you feel about that, Alistair, and whether you feel like there's a sort of intersectional element of this with young men in particular.
Boy, okay, it's a complex question. I mean, I think there has been a great loss of male identity, and a part of that has been the loss of the social structure that Christianity gave people in
Sure.
terms of a sense of what the family should be, the roles that mothers and fathers, husbands and wives had, and a lot of that has been challenged in the name of liberty.
Yes. Yeah.
And freedom.
Yeah.
And the sense that rules are things that you should reject as far as possible, and be your own person and sort of define yourself. And I think that coming back to that sort of sense of mental health, that has created huge problems for people.
Sure.
Because it's an enormous pressure to define yourself.
Yeah, indeed.
Particularly if you are having to define yourself as different and being an individual compared to everybody else. Where do you find your space to be you?
Yeah.
And this is the sort of fruit of 20 or 30 years of the so-called inward turn, where in order to find fulfillment, I had to be the best that I could be and to experience the most that I could experience. And that was a turn away from a sort of an external role and duty sort of sense of society. And I think that is running out of steam. I think that if you want to sort of try and explain where that sense of mental health or mental illness has come from, it's the enormous pressure of desperately trying to find out who I am. There's an enormous relief when you take on board what I consider to be the truth, that we are made in the image of God for God.
Mm-hmm.
That means you're not living for yourself, you're
Indeed.
living for someone else. Now, in our culture, um, doing anything other than for yourself would seem to be weak, or
Yep.
and
Yeah.
and it would seem to be allowing somebody else to have power over you.
Mm.
But this is a very liberating way of living,
Indeed.
to live for the one who created you, the one who uh, only has good things for you.
Mm.
And that means that you can sort of relax into your roles and responsibilities, your duties. And these are all old-fashioned concepts, which turn out to be highly liberating and highly fulfilling for people.
Yeah.
So I think there's the mental health crisis has sort of had a double whammy. It's got that sort of social loss of what is my role and who should I be within my family setup?
Mm.
What responsibilities do I have to anybody else?
Mm-hmm.
But then it also comes from that fundamental lack of meaning where we are told the universe doesn't care about you, never did, never will,
Mm.
and that at the end of the day, it's all meaningless. So if you're if you're desperately trying to enjoy life whilst you can, be as free as you possibly can, experience as much as you possibly can before you die, and it's worthless anyway,
Yeah.
that's a very depressing
Yeah.
way of
Right.
living.
Yeah. Right. Right.
So the really good news of Christianity is that you were created for a purpose.
Mm.
You were created in the image of God to love God and to be loved by Him.
Mm.
And that is enormously satisfying and enormously fulfilling because you don't just have to pack it all in
Indeed.
right now, right here, because you're living for eternity.
Yeah. I mean, it resonates really strongly with my own research, which I mean, I sort of noted when working with young men in secondary schools. I refer to it as the deification of the entrepreneur, and this is sort of referring to your Elon Musks and your sort of Andrew Tates as putting on a pedestal, almost deifying those individuals who perfectly fit in with the sort of neoliberal sense of self, in that they're a hyper individualist, and they create a sort of started from the bottom narrative, right? So to find true fulfillment, you have to start down as low as possible, and then you have to finish as high as possible in this great sort of rat race, being very, very wealthy and sort of the sort of fit male athletic body and all that kind of stuff. So there was sort of really interesting resonance with what you're saying about this idea of like, where does one pull meaning from, where we might say the hegemonic forms of masculinity that are being promoted, certainly online, are these sort of hyper masculine entrepreneurs, if you will. And then the reason I mention that is because within that, I mean, I noted a lack of what I called sort of civic responsibility or civic engagement. So the young men I worked with were very liberal by way that they were like, yeah, like, I haven't got an issue with if somebody is, I don't know, of a particular sexuality, or if somebody, is gender questioning. I don't have an issue with that, but it's not, I'm not going to engage in that conversation. I'm not going to go and wave a pride flag, right? That's not my problem. And that was a sort of quite extreme version, but the point being that they were essentially saying, look, you be who you want to be, but leave me to be who I want to be. Don't make me share in your struggle. Don't make me speak for you. Don't make me support you. You go do you, and I'll do me. So there was this real hyper individualist stuff in the young men that I was working with, and like you mentioned, there was therefore a sort of rejection of institutions and rejection of authority. And I wrote down about Tim Keller's reflections on a relationship with God being like a successful marriage, which I thought was quite, I've spoken about a few times, but Tim Keller talks about this idea that there's a misconception that to engage with the Christian faith is to effectively give yourself a lot of limitations and rules by which one has to abide. And Tim Keller says actually what you want to do is to reimagine this relationship to be like a good marriage, in that, yes, of course, when you're in a relationship with God, you are going to have certain things that you will sort of limit yourself to. But that's actually a very liberating thing, because what you're effectively doing is you're living for other people, and through the outward turn rather than the inward turn, you find your liberation, which I thought was a sort of beautiful testament to what you're saying.
Very much so. I mean, in order truly to be me, I need you.
Mm.
And that is something that I think the hyper-individualisms have completely lost.
Yeah, right.
That in order to be the best version, the most fulfilled individual, I need a community for
Right,
that. I
indeed.
simply can't do it on my own.
Yeah.
And marriage is the obvious illustration of that.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, what does it look like to be a fulfilled human being? Well, you know, I really think that marriage and family and children and the community, that is what goes to make a fulfilled life. And it's why the church is the outpost of the kingdom of God. It should be the light that shines within a community to say, look, here's a community of people who love each other, who find fulfillment in their diversity, who are able to be themselves and yet find support from a very wide range of people. You know, this is not something that weak people need. This is something that good people value.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because this sense of belonging and this need for community, um, a lot of young people were really lacking that. They were really lacking it. And I think it also maybe the Bible report also highlighted how this wasn't just nominal Christians. We're talking about active Christians
yeah.
who are actively going to church. And I think that's really important to note as well. It's not just those who might identify and say that oh yes, I'm a Christian, I identify as that. We're talking about people who want to be part of their church, of their local community. And again, if you're seeing that rise of young people saying they want to do that, it's just highlighting what you've both been talking about, this need and this realization that actually I want to serve others, and that brings me happiness.
And there's a real realization of the value of the Christian church and the Christian heritage. So many folks are noting the things that they're now seeing at risk of losing, namely the Christian tradition and its values. I mean, even the great Richard Dawkins calls himself a cultural Christian. I mean, that would never have happened 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So why is that? Well, he's suddenly realizing what the alternatives are and recognizing that he doesn't want to lose all that tremendous value. And, you know, people like Tom Holland recognizing the enormous cultural impact of Christianity over and against all kinds of other cultures. And so I think it's really good that there are lots of people for whom becoming a Christian is the start of a new Christian identity, as opposed to, as you've just been saying, people who've said, oh yeah, I'm a Christian because I was christened as a child, or my parents were Christian. That way of thinking and talking is diminishing and probably to extinction. And I think that's probably a good idea, because I think if people look at folks who simply were Christian or claim to be Christian because of parental heritage or because they lived in a so-called Christian country, then that will have given Christianity a very poor reputation with those who didn't actually come and practice. So I think the loss of all that is a good thing for the church. And now where Christianity still pertains, you're getting a much better version of it.
Yes, absolutely. And we're also seeing a rise in people engaging with scripture as well. So again, it's not just going to church, well, it's actually engaging with the word as well. But what I did find quite interesting was 34% of those
You can
churchgoers.
tell you're a psychologist. I mean, look at the amount of statistics. As
I
a
do like a statistic.
as a qualitative reader, cool. These statistics are giving me sweaty palms. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I've interrupted you there. Go on,
I
keep
come
going
in
with your
and just
macro
go, like,
approaches.
here's the evidence.
Yeah. I'm not one for evidence.
Not just my emotional thoughts.
Sorry, do carry on, sir.
34%, which is quite a high amount, I have to say, of churchgoers and those who engage with their Bible worry about being wrong when talking about it. Especially to those who aren't believers. And that, I know, well, just personally as a Christian, that's quite frightening.
Can I give a little anecdote?
Just before you do, what does that represent? It represents a view that there is objective truth with regards to Scripture. Now that's a big change. Because previously the view of theology or view of Bible is you can make it say anything you want to, or you know, you believe what you want. Now here, all of a sudden, we're finding a situation where people are concerned to get it right. Now that's a very big shift. Now, of course, the thing that people can always share is their experience of coming to the Lord and putting their trust and their faith in Christ. And that's not something that they can get wrong, as it were. That is their lived experience. And that testimony is always going to be powerful. But the fact that now people are saying to themselves, if I'm going to share what I believe Scripture says, I better represent it correctly. It's therefore not simply a subjective opinion. That's a big change.
Yeah. Again, it's that shift away from the sort of moral or the relativism that we were talking about earlier, right? In that there is something objective outside of the self and the interpretation and the meaning making of the individual. I mean, the anecdote I was going to share actually was that when I first came to my own Christian faith, I remember having a discussion with a friend of mine who intelligent guy. He's a academic in the field of history, and we were talking. He would probably describe himself as a atheist, I would imagine. And when I was sharing my journey with him, he said to me, "I'm surprised to find out that you're a Christian, actually." And I said, "Oh, go on, to talk to me about that." And he said, "Well, it's just, isn't it quite an anti-intellectual thing, And other than being hugely offended by that, that did lead me down a rabbit hole into the sort of Alistair McGrath, sort of philosophy of science argument where, okay, well, how are we constructing our own epistemologies and things? But the point being, I think, I realized in that moment, perhaps, how still there might be, or probably is, a huge element of stigma around being a confident, outspoken Christian in the current time. I don't know if that's something you've experienced with your own faith.
Certainly, yes. I mean, people are less so now, but certainly, growing up in an academic environment, um, when you tell people that you're a theologian, there's a sort of pause, and often people didn't really know, first of all, what that was, and then what they were supposed to do about it, because again, was that just therefore me asserting my particular views on unsuspecting people? Was it a sort of a power trip, or just simply tradition, or was I simply training people in practices, something like an apprenticeship?
Yeah.
And so when you can get people to talk about theology as a discipline with truth and with evidence and with knowledge, then some folk are, sadly surprised at that. But it does then mean that the conversations are usually quite good, because there's a lot for folk to learn.
Yes, yeah, indeed. I mean, I found that I had to, almost like you were saying, Natalie, about, I can't remember the numbers, I'm sorry, but you were sort of saying that, there was a large element of people not confident in sort of almost defending their faith, right? Or being apologists for their faith.
But also, again, harking back to the youth, like the younger Christians as well, especially were really, they found it very challenging to even like have the conversations about it. And then that kind of got me interested actually in your work in intelligent design.
Indeed.
Because if I'm right, you did this research in 2018?
Yes, I've been doing it, but did my PhD for a little while, my doctorate, I should say, and so that was over a sort of 5-year period. But I had been teaching the subject for quite a lot of years before that as well.
Yeah, well, it was really interesting to read in your book. It's called Faithful Science, and you can find it on Amazon. Am I correct?
Correct, yes.
I found it really interesting that in that as well, you found that the university students, they actually felt marginalized. And I was like, gosh, actually, yes.
It's a strong word.
But it is. That's what I mean. It evokes quite a lot.
Yeah.
But
and also doesn't surprise me.
But then it also wasn't surprising. That's exactly it, And actually, there really is a need, I think, for the church to be able to empower those who are new to faith, and also our young disciples as well. And how do we do that? Well, one of those ways, I believe, would be through intelligent design, because what I found really interesting as well is that intelligence design theorists, they want to join in with the conversation. It's not about going, I'm right, you're wrong, this is black, this is white. It's about trying to have more of that interdisciplinary approach to everything. And that's why I found your research and your book really interesting. And actually, I found it perhaps you'd notice this now as well, even more relevant than it was when you were doing it.
I think it's very relevant. Thank you for that. I do think that it comes out of a real sense of conflict within a school and university environment where the common way of framing God and science is in conflict within schools. So it's the most common term or way of expressing how do you relate faith and science within a school environment. So, for instance, you can talk about science in RE classes, but you just can't bring God into science classes. And the school teachers are they have a very, very hard wall about that, very divisive about that. And the notion that you could explain some of this or scientific concepts theologically would just be necessarily excluded. So that's and that produces for Christian children a marginalizing and a muting. Because first of all, you are required to use the language of naturalism, that's sort of Darwinian evolution. You're required to buy into the narrative of self-generating life, of no sort of design in the whole history of life, and use terms therefore that are alien to you. Now that sounds like learning another language for a Christian, and when you can't use your terms of creator and designer and purpose, then you are muted. So it's a real marginalizing effect within that school environment, and so I found that so therefore I think that the subject of intelligent design is perfect for this podcast. You know, it is on the margins in so many areas. Want to just push back a little bit on something you said about the ID advocates. What we're trying, the theorists, they're not trying to win by power. They're not trying to play a political game. And that is often the accusation, that ID movement is a political entity. And it's fair to say that it does have political implications, because it does have implications about how you then run schools or how you organize society, for instance. So there's no question it has political connotations. But they don't want to simply put forwards their argument on political terms. They do want to engage in debate. They do want to say the other explanations are wrong, or at least substantially less right than their view, because they're arguing over evidence. And they want to say what theory, what worldview, what scientific explanations best fit the evidence. And they're pushing back in a Darwinian explanation, saying that is wrong because of this, this, and this. So they are engaged in debate about right and wrong, but they're just not wanting to win by power.
Yes,
that's really true.
Yeah,
There's
that's really important.
a term that Bourdieu uses, and you knew he was going to come up at one point. I'm a big Bourdieusian theorist, and he talks about this idea of symbolic violence. I mean, he talks about it in a class perspective, but from a theological perspective, or almost an epistemological perspective, I wonder whether there is this argument that by being so, by being so sort of positivist purism, that we get in the science classroom, right? The empirical purism that we get in the science classroom, is that almost an act of, yes, it's marginalizing, but is it almost a form of symbolic violence, where what you're saying to children who perhaps are of the Christian faith, or whose families are of the Christian faith, you're wrong about that, right? Like you said, it's a different language, it's a different worldview, and what you're saying is, no, we have the sort of hierarchical power here as the educational institution, and this is how it actually works. So anything that your preacher, mother, father, brother is saying to you about this, well, they're wrong, because we're going to go with the rational, empirical, purist approach here. And that's truth.
Even more than that, you have Kellerman, Professor Kellerman, who is a psychologist in the States, and she did these groundbreaking studies saying that young children, sort of our nursery school children, have a tendency to attribute design and purpose, teleology, goal-oriented thinking, even when they're very young. So they'll look at the moon. What's that for? Well, it was put there to let us see at night. That is to say, there's a purpose, and the language consistently implies a non-human intention.
Yeah.
That is to say, they don't articulate the fact that it necessarily was God, but they might do.
Yeah.
Now, Kellerman says, yeah, this is so contrary to classic somebody like A.C. Grayling, who says we're all born atheists. You have to sort of inculcate theism into a child. Turns out that's not right.
Yeah, right.
We're actually born teleologists.
Right, yeah.
We're born thinking that things have purpose, natural things have purpose. Kellerman says, and isn't that terrible? And we should do something about this. And she describes these children as being promiscuous teleologists,
Right.
which is just the worst
That could be the name
title
of your
you could
autobiography.
ever use for children. So she has designed books that start to teach nursery school children about genetic drift and about Darwinian population genetics, because she says, isn't it problematic that kids naturally use concepts of design at this age? We need to teach that out of them.
Wow.
Wasn't she saying that it was actually a form of like mental instability?
Exactly so.
That's what I read, yeah. So
And again, the violence in that, right? I mean, I don't think I'm using a hyperbolic term there. That's an act of violence. That's an act of suppression, right? I mean, I'm really interested in particular. I mean, I think it would be a good point, and I hope we've given you enough forewarning of this so that you don't feel caught off guard here. But what I think would be a really good idea is for us to just get a bit of from your perspective, Alistair, about how do you introduce somebody? Let's say we take your man off the street and he has grown up in these, you know, gone through the education system and been taught and buys into the idea of sort of pure Darwinist evolution, you know, empirical science, natural science, that explains existence, society, etc., etc. You know, never heard of intelligent design before. How would you introduce and describe intelligent design to somebody coming from that perspective?
Okay. Well, intelligent design says that some features of the world are best explained using concepts of design. So it's not a totalizing theory. It's not trying to say that everything is, nor is it denying that some things happen by chance and that some things happen according to physical laws. But it is saying there are certain features which you can't explain just using the only two causes that naturalists refer to, which is chance and law. And the classic examples of that are information, consciousness, existence at all, and things like fine tuning. So you can go through a few of these things. Why is there something than nothing? Did the universe have a beginning? Well, you can be pretty confident that now that science shows that the universe has a beginning, we can therefore have a sort of an agreed point at that, because even the Darwinists tend to agree that nowadays. Didn't used to in the past, or used not to in the past. But if that's so, well then what kicks things off? And every theory that a naturalist turns to seems to require information input right at the start. That's the big problem. Even your quantum vacuums require a setup, an information setup. So that's one area about why is there something rather than nothing. Then we look at things like the genetic information in the code of life, in the DNA. It is now a repeatable experiment that you simply can't get information from chaos. And there's no law that produces the kinds of program that is in DNA. And so not only can we show that those two causes are ineffective at producing code, what we have got is our repeated experience that mind is a sufficient cause for producing code. So what we're saying is, of all the competing explanations for information in the cell, the only one that works is our mind. And so you can just carry on with this kind of approach of saying, look, let's take some key evidence. Let's take, for instance, self-awareness. It is a total mystery for a naturalist how non-thinking matter, non-self-aware matter, suddenly at some point develops self-awareness. There is no causal explanation that anybody has. for what the intelligent design advocates would talk about as being the soul. Not all of them. Actually, ID is quite a broad church, so there's quite a wide range of views on that.
Sure.
And so you don't have to explain everything.
No.
All you have to do is explain one thing well.
Yeah.
And that will, we hope, we expect, cause somebody who's a consistent materialist to go away and say, well, my worldview isn't cutting it. It's not sufficient to explain all the evidence that I'm seeing.
And do you think it's fair to say, therefore, that, you know, science, hard science, natural science, it doesn't stand up to its own empirical standards, right? It doesn't fit its own empirical
Well, more
standards.
than that. So there used to be viewed as a very strong conflict between science and faith. That was the view. Now, philosophers like Alvin Plantinga are saying, no, there's actually a deep concord between science and faith, because science deals with truth, and it deals with the realities of information. There's a fundamental discord between atheism and science, because it undoes itself. Why should I trust the mind of a scientist if at the end of the day it's simply the product of a chaotic process? Why should I trust the product of natural science if there is no such thing as fundamental truth? So there's a deep discord, funnily enough, at the nexus of atheism and science, and there's a deep concord between theism and science.
Indeed.
So I guess the bigger question here then, reflecting on all of this, is, well, how do we get this back into the public sphere, especially education? It's a really tricky one, isn't it? Because there is, like you were saying, it does end up becoming political as well. Have you found that there has been more of an interest in intelligence design? Do you see that that is becoming more accepted and respected? Perhaps there is more debate happening, or is it just not where you want it to be yet?
Well, it's certainly not where I want it to be yet. I certainly have seen an increase. There's been a bit of a sort of wave function on it. When it was first introduced, it was a curiosity, and quite a lot of people were interested in debating it simply out of a sort of scientific curiosity. So there was a book published by, I think it was Oxford Press, it was either Cambridge or Oxford, a really impressive set of debates between ID proponents and atheist theorists or atheist scientists, taking each other's arguments seriously. But and that was published, and it's a really great book. When other atheists started to realize the implications of ID, and when they wanted to put on a conference to back up the book, that was pulled. Then the political powers started to shut down. So that initial interest and sort of curiosity has closed down, and then you get the sort of language of, well, intelligent design, it's just creationism in a tuxedo. That was the clever line. It was quite a good line, actually, and it did have the effect.
Sometimes you've got to concede to a good line, haven't you?
It was a smart way of framing, because it's trying to win without a fight, and that's what you want. If you're a Darwinist, you really want to have the ground, have the field all to yourself.
Exactly.
And the best way of doing that is bolting the door and not letting anybody else in to debate you. And but back to why our young people are turning more to Christ or to Christian faith, because YouTube has had a huge influence, and more with men than women, because it's a more male space than with women. I think that getting the argument out there, the great debates between the theists and the atheists have really highlighted that actually the best arguments are with the theists. I mean, I would say that, wouldn't I? But I really do think that's right. And it's a more masculine space. And I think what happens is it's very difficult to defend your Christian faith if you don't have anybody that you can look up to.
Indeed.
That can stand up to the sort of bullying language. And we now have plenty of folk who are doing that, plenty of folk who should have the kind of credibility that we're looking for. So a classic person is John Lennox,
Yeah.
professor of mathematics, emeritus professor of mathematics at Oxford University. You just don't get to be one of those unless you are unbelievably smart.
Indeed.
So he's got all the academic credibility that you could possibly want, and he is facing down, in my view, rather easily, the arguments from the atheists.
Yeah.
To the extent now that they're quite unwilling often to debate with him.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's all captured on YouTube.
Yeah.
That's seeping into the culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
People are realizing that actually, if you oppose Darwinism, you're not dumb. You might actually be quite smart.
Yes,
Is it-
brilliant.
we watched the other night, Natalie and I, we were watching Alistair McGrath and Richard Dawkins having a little intellectual spa, and it was really interesting because I don't want to turn this into a Dawkins bashing session, but it was really interesting sort of three quarters of the way into that where Dawkins concedes, well, actually we're all agnostic, aren't we, because we can't really know. And so he very quickly climbed off of this sort of pedestal that he'd been, he'd written books about and all this kind of stuff. So it was really interesting that the moment that he got into that, that debate with Alistair McGrath, who likewise, I think the guy's got 3 PhDs, I think, in sort of biomechanical science, or something that is just so far outside of my field of knowledge. But like you say, in terms of academic or institutional credibility, if you want to sort of use that as a measure of somebody's legitimacy, it doesn't get a lot better than your John Lennox and your Alistair McGraths. And
with Alistair McGrath, he is great at dissecting the Dawkins problem. Trying to sort of show the incoherence of the position. And he's still a little bit hesitant about some of the evidence pointing towards intelligent design. So he would be more a theistic evolutionist, which is a sort of, I think, a problematic position to do. I think it's a legacy position where Christianity tried to get into the academy and tried to say, look, we are smart, we are able to compete in your world.
Interesting.
We are not going to challenge your tenets. We're going to work within the constrictures of it. And I do think that Christianity caused a huge problem for itself by accepting the basic premise that Darwinism is the right way, the right lens through which you do biology. So there is still quite a bit of cultural shift needing to happen within the university at that level.
Quite.
And so that's why intelligent design is still not sort of regularly accepted within the university, because it pushes back on that fundamental theistic evolution position, which was seen and is still seen as being the socially acceptable face of the interface between Christianity and faith within the university.
Yeah, quite. And it's almost, if you want to have the floor in that regard, you must speak the language of the sort of the hegemony, right? So if we will listen to your side of this as long as you're speaking our language within our very strict framework, which is really interesting, which intelligent design doesn't necessarily do, which is probably the barriers you're running up against.
Sorry, I just wanted to add before we move on, but obviously we've been talking about teaching this with young people, and you were saying about the conference that you were doing, which is incredible, but I would like to see it available for everybody personally, especially in churches. I know in my church, if that was something that was available for everybody to learn about the intelligent design, because it's empowering, I think, for any Christian. Again, going back to my statistics, it wasn't just young people who felt unconfident. It was, we're talking about everyone here who felt unconfident, talking about especially things like evolution and Darwinism. So I guess I'm thinking in my ideal world, ideal reality, every church would be having these kind of programs, these kind of courses available for their congregation to attend, whatever age.
I think I very much agree. The need for apologetic teaching is very, very high.
I agree.
Intelligent design is an interesting one because it has taken a very deliberate theoretical stance to distinguish itself from creationism, because creationism is a sort of a fall guy. It's a straw man argument within culture, within popular culture. If you can be written off as a creationist, again, you don't have to actually engage. There are some really brilliant creationists, but you'd never have to engage with their argument because it's a label that you stick on somebody, and you never have to engage with it. So intelligent design has positioned itself very brilliantly as not starting from a religious position. So whereas creationism's primary intent is to defend the truth and historicity of Scripture, Intelligent design positions itself by saying, what we're trying to do is to show the insufficiency of the naturalist argument by highlighting the problems and by showing the need for design within a scientific context. So it becomes an intra-scientific debate as opposed to a science versus faith debate. Now, that's the reason for its success, is because it's positioned itself within the scientific academy, within scientific arguments. Now, I do think that the church needs to wise up about what science is saying and how to respond with a scientific language. But intelligent design on its own would be insufficient within the church context, because you really do then need to join the dots with how it fits with our scripture. There are obvious connections, but within an intelligent design approach, they try to sort of seal off from engaging with that for fear of then slipping its identity. Generally speaking, churches need to be much better at apologetics for all kinds of reasons. And there are loads of different approaches that one can take. And I think it's horses for courses. Those people who prefer to take one particular style of apologetics, whether it's a sort of a more testimony side of things, whether it's a more philosophical side of things, whether it's more evidential, historic, or even sort of a presuppositional view, where you presuppose the truth of Scripture and you start from that. All kinds of different ways of beginning apologetics might very well work for your different contexts. But it would be great to see the church really grow in its confidence and knowledge of apologetics more generally.
Absolutely, because I guess there's perhaps a little bit of an anxiety there that, okay, we're seeing this increase, and how do we maintain that but grow it as well? And if people are feeling unconfident, are we going, hopefully not, but are we going to see people dwindle away from church, or, not being as active anymore in the community because they get frightened, they almost get scared away when they do have to engage with these conversations with people of those who aren't with their faith? So
the only thing I'd say about that is, if they know that, okay, I don't know the answer, but I do know somebody who does.
yes,
And if they've got that sort of recognition that there are folk out there with sufficient credibility, with sufficient knowledge, actually that gives them a lot of security.
To be able to
again,
say
that goes
someone,
back to community though, doesn't it?
does,
And the need for that community and that church. Yeah, that's brilliant. Looking ahead again with how things are going to go, like, do we think that this trend is going to continue? We pray that it's going to continue. Do we think it's going to rise? And how can the church engage more with that? How can we engage more with the public sphere as well, to be perhaps taken a bit more seriously, so that local councils, governments, organizations as well, especially mental health ones, realize, okay, actually, we need to maybe be listening to everybody in our local community, in our society.
I think that society can learn a lot from the strategy of the intelligent design movement. So rather like what we were saying earlier, you start with AC Grayling saying, isn't it terrible the way that children are being so negatively affected by religion? What we want in our classrooms is just a nice, neutral space. We just want to teach the facts, ma'am. We don't want to have any religious influence. And what intelligent design has highlighted is, no, that's you winning. That's an atheist space. Let's not
a nice neutral space full of my own ideologies, and that's all we want.
Let's just call this out for what it is.
Yeah.
And I think we need to replicate that in public. So in schools, in councils, for many councils, for many years, they began council meetings with prayer. And now, for all kinds of reasons, people have said, I don't want to do that. But some of the argument is because that might be offensive to other people. So we go for the neutral space. Well, yeah, but it is now offensive to people who want to begin places with prayer. Now, I'm not saying that the prayer should always win, but I'm saying is you don't get to win by just pretending you're being neutral. If you're making a case that your space should be run this particular way and that's best for more people, fine, but make sure that it's actually a case that you're making rather than a false claim that somehow you're being neutral and it's the religious people who are wanting to sort of spoil things.
And indeed, it doesn't. It frames itself almost as, you know, I don't have any sort of, you know, I think we need to free the culture of a particular ideology. That in and of itself is an ideological position where you're effectively saying, well, let us maintain the status quo then, right? And all the sort of cultural and ideological baggage that comes with that. Like you say, I don't know that there is such thing as a sort of ideological or philosophical or theological neutrality. That such a thing can't be said to exist, surely.
Very much so. And I think this will have to go up all the way to government. And now I'm immediately regretting saying that because I don't know enough about politics. But, you know, the Sir Alistair Campbell, "We don't do God" phrase has left a lingering legacy. And perhaps it's time that politicians do God and do it confidently. Because, again, it's another example of an apparent neutral space that's having real world consequences. Because and particularly in light of the work that Tom Holland has done, is, well, if you get rid of God, your society is by far and away poorer for it.
Indeed.
You have a society which has lost its anchor, which has slipped its moorings, and is now drifting, and that's not healthy for a society. And so, you know, that there could well be a rise in a much more ardent, much more vocally Christian political movement. I don't give it a great deal of hope because it's been tried so many times, particularly in this country. But even if we had politicians who were willing to make sort of theological cases from time to time, again, it would give credence to folk who said, yeah, the reason that I go into politics is because I have these well-formed Christian values, which I think are good not just for Christians, but for everybody.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's, you know, we were discussing before we were recording today, you know, that this is a whole episode in and of itself. So we don't want to open this whole can of worms, but where you fail to do that, my fear is that always what you effectively do is you leave space for what some kind of refer to as Bonapartism, where you effectively, in this interregnum, you open the door for someone to come in and own the narrative that perhaps shouldn't be owning the narrative. And I noted sort of when Tommy Robinson or Stephen Yaxley Lennon was released from prison the other day, he sort of came out wearing a big cross, and there's a real conservative sort of Republican pull towards, well, actually we can use faith to legitimize our own politics. It's not the conversation we're going to have today, but that's really interesting that without that mainstream engagement with this conversation, with this discourse, you effectively leave it to be owned and grabbed hold of by people who are perhaps using it to legitimize views which are problematic depending on one's own position. So going back to Natalie's point, I think, yeah, well, you know, where do you see this going then? I mean, you know, there's a sort of utopian vision perhaps from a particular perspective that in the future this might be included in curricula and therefore would have to be legislated for, etc. We're probably, I don't know if you agree, a fair way away from that. So what do you think the immediate next steps are?
Definitely the vision for the intelligent design movement has become entirely redundant.
Right.
Wouldn't that be great? No, in the meantime, I think that what the intelligent design scientists are now showing is not just that our role is to, as it were, chastise and to correct what we see as the false dogma of neo-Darwinianism, but actually to show the positive scientific advances and advantages of using design as a scientific causation. And in fact to show how the materialist worldview is hampering scientific research. A really interesting example of that was the ENCODE project, which is still ongoing, but sort of made its first report a few years ago, looking at the non-genetic information within the DNA. So there are 20,000 genes in human DNA, but it's a fairly small proportion of the DNA itself, about 5%. Previously, most folk had said that the rest of the DNA was just junk, the so-called junk DNA language, that it was the flotsam and jetsam of evolutionary detritus. And it was the playground of mutations where potential genes could be made, and that was the sort of the argument there. And therefore, nobody bothered to study the
Yeah.
junk DNA, because why would you bother?
Yeah.
Well, the ENCODE project said it's really odd because this non-genetic material is being expressed regularly. Why would it bother doing that? In fact, the ENCODE project has shown at the last count it was 80%, and I'm saying that I'm going to hold out for the fact that all of this is going to be expressed at some point. So 80% of the so-called junk DNA is being expressed and being used for some purpose.
Yep.
And we've now found that there are all kinds of reasons. It's timing devices, it's switches that switch on genes on and off. Actually, it's to help us grow. It's to say when to expand production of calcium, and when to grow, and when to go through puberty, and all kinds of sort of regulatory functions. Well, now, isn't that interesting? The Darwinian worldview was hampering scientific research.
Yeah.
And it was the intelligent design advocate who first said in print, it's very unlikely that God would have a system where most of the code was junk.
Yeah.
I think that as we go through, we'll find that most of it has a purpose.
Interesting.
This was refuted and rejected year upon year until the ENCODE project said, turns out he was right. Well, they didn't actually acknowledge him, but we do.
Maybe in the future.
We got
Once
it
the
right
paradigm
long
shifts.
before
Once
you
the paradigm
guys did.
shifts.
Exactly.
Good stuff. So final sort of area of conversation where we could talk about this stuff all day, but I suppose a 24-hour episode is probably out of reach. But so where do you see this going then in terms of within looking outwards? We've sort of discussed how within the intelligent design movement these conversations are taking place. I think it's fair to say, again, your man on the street, your child sat in a classroom is not yet going to have access to these discourses. So what would you suggest if somebody listening was interested in intelligent design, perhaps coming to this as someone, whether of the Christian faith or not? Where would you direct those people in terms of engaging with this kind of conversation for the first time?
Well, there's so many good YouTube videos. So the person to start with would be Steve Meyer, who's the sort of head of intelligent design movement. He has presented on Joe Rogan. He's been on Piers Morgan. So, again, he's really out there in terms of the sort of YouTube presence.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be great to develop the courses that I've run in the past about teaching intelligent design, done it over a lot of different formats. And I think that there's a real need to develop a training program for folk to come to take on board these arguments, which they're not particularly difficult arguments to make. They're just unusual arguments to learn because folk are not used to hearing them. But it wouldn't be particularly tricky to have a training course, and then, of course, to see training happen much more extensively. That is happening. More and more people are showing interest to support the work that's being done. There's a move in Cambridge that is where a centre is being set up to go right back to one of the hearts of academic interest, heart of academic teaching, and to show that intelligent design belongs right there. So there's a lot of good movement that's happening in the UK as well as around Europe. So I went to a conference last year where Poles and Italians and folks from Scandinavia came, and one of them came, Steinar Torvaldsson, came and did a prestige lecture in Cambridge called the John Ray Lectures, where he showed the work of intelligent design in his field, which is on mathematics and coding. So I think that it's a slow process, but it is seeping into the academy. The academy is reaping the benefits of it, and that's the way I think you change culture, is by getting into the heart of it, going to the center of learning, and showing and getting the smartest people on board that you possibly can. So it's definitely a two-pronged attack. Get into the centers of education, but also equip folks within the churches to share these relatively straightforward arguments.
Absolutely. No, I think that was fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alistair. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you today.
Indeed.
And to hear more about this intelligent design movement as well. And I, for one, am an absolute advocate for it. And I'm looking forward to seeing this flourishing, which I'm sure it will. So thank you very much for coming on board.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.